Shavua Tov, happy Hanukkah. We are learning the Mesilas Yesharim, the Path of the Just, and we're in the middle of chapter 13. Where if we use the Art Scroll edition, we are on page 277 in that edition. And we're talking about precious. Precious, or abstinence, refers to sometimes we need to abstain from activities which the Torah does not necessarily prohibit. And this is the first step to Chasidus, to be a person who goes above and beyond what he is required to do. Because if our desire in life is to connect with Hashem and to live a life of spirituality beyond the physical, and by the way, that's what Hanukkah is all about. The Greeks were a people that their entire reason for existence was devotion to the physical. They didn't believe in anything spiritual. But as Jews, we believe that there's more to life than just what we can see and what we can sense with our five senses. But there's a spiritual world, and we want to get close to Hashem. We want to get close to God. There's a world after this world, and we would like to prepare for it. And not only that, but in this world, the real way to live a happy, successful life is when we place the spiritual as our goal and not the physical. So even if the Torah does not prohibit something explicitly, does not mean that we should engage in it. So what we're going to talk about now, or what we mentioned last week, let's say, is that there are certain activities which might lead to sin. The Ramchal wrote that everything in the physical world is really a potential to lead us astray. We mentioned that there is nothing wrong with eating nice foods and drinking, but when it becomes a goal in and of itself, that we're always searching to have fancy foods and to eat delicacies, that could very easily lead to sin. Because if, let's say, it costs a lot of money and maybe someone loses their job, so they start doing unsavory things financially, they start stealing so they can have enough money for all of their expensive habits. Maybe they won't dedicate time to serving Hashem. If, let's say, they're eating a nice steak and they just love eating so much that they are not going to interrupt their meal to go daven mincha, to go pray the afternoon service. So everything has to be done with the proper mindset and the proper goal. And there are certain activities that if we gain and our goals become too physical, that will lead us to sin. And that's something that we have to avoid. So let's continue where we left off on page 277 in the Art Scroll. V'tireh, hizosi tachbula gedola adam l'man hinatzal miyisro. It's a very good advice, a very good thing in order to save oneself from the Yetzer Hara. Meaning, abstaining from certain physical activities even though they are permitted. When a person is involved in a sin itself, it's very hard to stop. Therefore, so therefore, when a person is far away from the sin, he has to make sure he stays far away. Because then it will be very difficult for the Yetzer Hara to entice him. Let's talk about a few examples. Let's say somebody loves Big Macs from McDonald's. He just loves them. He used to not be religious and used to eat them all the time, and he just can't resist when there's a Big Mac in front of him. So if, let's say, he for some reason has to go into McDonald's to use the bathroom or something, and he's just sitting in McDonald's and he has just such a desire to eat a Big Mac, he can smell it, he can taste it, and it's only $1.99 or whatever it is now, and he just wants to go get the Big Mac. No one's going to see him. So he, at that point, when he's already in McDonald's and he could smell it and he could taste it and he remembers how good it is, and it's very difficult for a person to overcome their evil inclination when they're so close. So the smart idea would be that if he has to go to the bathroom, go someplace else if he's driving. And don't even go into McDonald's. The way to avoid the Yetzer Hara, to avoid temptation, is not even to come close to the temptation in the first place. And then it's easier to avoid. Obviously, we can't avoid all temptation in our life, but we have to be smart. We have to avoid those situations. That's why the Torah and Halacha put such an emphasis on the separation between the sexes. The Torah is very realistic about the sex drive, especially the male sex drive. So therefore, there's a prohibition of yichud, that a man is not allowed to be secluded with a woman in a private place that he is not related to or is not married to. That is prohibited because the Torah is realistic and knows that in such a situation where a person is private, is in a locked room, let's say, it's very difficult if a person's temptation overcomes him in that situation to avoid sinning in that situation. So the Torah says, don't even put yourself in a precarious situation. And from a lot of the stuff has been going on in the past couple of years, if men had followed the laws of Yichud, if people had followed the laws of Yichud, then a lot of issues could be avoided. Someone actually told me they saw the guidelines for the U.S. Army and about fraternization between male soldiers and female soldiers, and they said if you read it, it actually is almost point by point the Code of Jewish Law on these laws of Yichud, about how men and women are supposed to be separate. Right? There's a halacha that a person can't even go within Daled Amos, can't even go within 4 cubits of a house of ill repute. We're worried that, let's be honest, we're all human beings, and as holy as a person might be, we are still physical beings. And the Torah says, instead of putting yourself in a situation and then trying to fight your evil inclination when the fires of passion are so hot, don't even put yourself in the situation. Better don't be secluded in a room with a woman you shouldn't be secluded with than being secluded with her and then trying to fight your evil inclination to avoid sinning. Hine, habi'ila im ishto muterasi heter gamor. An example, the Ramchal says, having relations with one's wife, it's totally allowed, obviously. Amnam kvar tiknu tvila l'bal karin. But what did the rabbis do? They made tvila for a bal kari. We'll explain what that is in a second. Shalayu talmidei chacham mitzuyin etzel nesheim ketar negailim lefi she'afal pi shehamaisa atzmo mutter amnam kvar hu matbiya ba'atzmo shel adam hatayva azos umisham yachol lehimashech al ha'aser u'kamayim rabbasinu zechron levracha. I'll say that in a second. There used to be, that we don't have this anymore, but the rabbis made a law that a bal kari has to go to the mikveh. A bal kari, before he says words of holiness, before he learns Torah or he davens. A bal kari is a person that has a seminal emission. So if a person had a seminal emission, then before he davens, which Jews are required to do 3 times a day, or before he studies Torah, he has to go to the mikveh. The reason they did this was that even though relations with one's wife is totally permitted, they didn't want people to totally be focused on that and make that the center of their life. If people were just focused on having relations all day, that was very detrimental to a person's spiritual growth. Even though it's totally allowed. One's allowed, obviously, and it's actually a mitzvah to have relations with one's spouse, with one's wife. But to make that the focus of life and to be doing that all the time, that would actually lead to a detrimental spiritual aspect. So the rabbi said every time a man has a seminal emission, he's got to go to the mikveh before he davens or before he studies Torah. Now the reason is because men, it's a kind of it's a little bit inconvenient to have to go to the mikveh every time you want to go daven or every time you want to go study Torah. So this was an incentive that the amount that men were with their wives was limited to some extent. We don't have this takana anymore, but very holy people still observe it, but it's not a law any longer. Like the rabbis say, there's a small organ that a person has. If he satiates it, if he gives into it, if he feeds it, it'll be hungry. But if he starves it, it'll be full. So we know what that's talking about. V'lo od. Furthermore, Elashafilu b'shah haruya ve'aisa hagon amru al Rabbi Eliezer shahai megala tefach u'mechasat tfachayim v'dom l'misha kafu shade. Rabbi Eliezer, who was a very holy person, he would, if he had to reveal a small amount of his flesh, tefach, he would cover 2 tefachim, meaning he was a very, very modest person. And when he had to engage in relations, it was something that he didn't enjoy. It sounds like he was like forced to do it. That he shouldn't even be enjoying it at that moment. So again, that's a very high level. We're not expected to be at that level, but the idea is that physicality shouldn't be a goal in and of itself, and that physicality should be limited to some extent. But we also don't believe that a person totally should abstain from these things, right? That is also not a religion. There's a mitzvah for a man to have relations with his wife. It's just saying that it shouldn't be the entire goal, because if a person makes it the entire goal, he's going to awaken certain desires within him and will eventually lead him to do things that he's not supposed to. Hamabushim vakishutim. Also, clothing is another area where a person could practice precious. Clothing and the way he adorns himself, or jewelry and things like that. Lo hizhira Torah al yafyam. Oh, al tavnisim. The Torah doesn't prohibit us from wearing certain types of clothes. Ella shelo yeh behem kilayim v'yeh behem tzitzis v'az kulam mutarim. Only that they don't have shatnez and that a person has tzitzis. Then it's allowed. Amnam mi lo yedeh shema levishus hape'er v'harakima timashech hagaiva v'gam aznus yigbal ba. But it is known that when people wear exceedingly fine clothing, isn't it going to lead to arrogance and to immorality? Right? If you have people walking around wearing the finest clothes, very expensive bags, very expensive, suits and dresses, there's going to instill a certain arrogance in a person. Oh, look at me! Look what I'm wearing! I'm better than you. So, even though there's no prohibition to dress like that, the Ramchal is saying if someone wants to engage in precious, it's not a good idea to wear that because of the sins that it could lead to. Milvad hakina v'hatayva v'haoshek hanimshachim mikol ma shehu yakar al adam lahasigo. Furthermore, it'll lead to jealousy and lust. Right? This person has a fancier type of tie, so I want to get that type of tie. Mikol ma yakar al adam lahasigo. Ukfar am zichron l'vracha. The rabbi said, "Kevin shiro hayetzer adam shetole ba'keva memashmish b'gadav u'mesalsel b'sara omer zeshali." He says when the Yetzer Hara sees a person that he's smoothing out his clothing and he's doing his hair, trying to look good, the Yetzer Hara says, that guy's mine. If he's so involved with his physical appearance, and that's what's important to him, even though that's not a sin yet, but the Yetzer Hara says, that guy's mine, I can trap him. He's very close to sinning, to put into him the feelings of haughtiness, of jealousy, of lust. So the Ramchal, again, this basic idea that even things which are permitted, it's a good idea to refrain from them because it's very easy to fall into sin. So thank you to everyone who is joining us and who joined us, and I hope everyone has a beautiful week and continues to have a happy Hanukkah.